Today from the vault, we're going to be talking about how clean was ancient Rome. We're going to take a look at ancient toilets. And what we're going to be talking about is, well, a lot of things. Sanitation, keeping clean in ancient Rome. We're going to take a look at the baths, and a great fun feature of public spaces like the baths would be the latrines, like we see here in Ostia Antica, right by the Forum baths. So today it's really about Roman bathing and the bathrooms, so often associated with the baths. But how clean was ancient Rome? That's the question we want to ask. And we're going to talk about health and sanitation, the function of the Cloaca Maxima, the function of the aqueducts, and then finally tying it together, the balneum, the small baths, and the thermae, the big baths. And also then, in terms of keeping clean in ancient Rome, the Forica, the public bathroom, and then the concept of toilet paper. Of course, they didn't have toilet paper. We'll see what they used. Ultimately, bathrooms are even going to be private within some certain households. Examples in Pompeii, examples in Ostia. And then finally, overall, this concept of cleanliness in Rome and living with disease, because indeed it was a pretty messy, dirty city compared by, let's say, modern standards. So first, a little view of a big bath complex. Going big, going bold, we're going to the baths of Caracalla. We're looking at that central core area, but the entire bath complex made up almost 30 acres. So just getting a good look at the caldarium space and a series of the heated rooms, 3 on either side of the caldarium space. Just to kind of contextualize, where our point of departure is. Health and sanitation, though. How are you keeping yourself clean? Well, ultimately, we see here you're going to the baths, but it's the aediles that are in charge of keeping the city clean. They're elected officials, and they're dealing with everything that is dumped in the streets. So we don't just want to think about it as garbage men. We want to think about it as all human waste, all the materials that you do not want. So you can imagine what would have littered the streets. And of course, if you don't have a, an efficient system of removing that material, then you're going to have disease. You're going to have fetid odors. You're going to have, a world of trouble. So the aediles are in charge of taking care of the city in that regard and removing this stuff to outside the city so that the people living inside the city have a good living experience, right? But obviously, it's an uphill battle that they're going to be facing since most people don't have any real substantial plumbing in their homes. So you typically just turn it out on the street. And then those streets had to be washed out, cleaned up, swept up, and debris to be removed. The Romans are going to be putting in sewer lines, the cloaca. And of course, the most famous one we'll be looking at is the Cloaca Maxima. And we'll see exactly what purpose they serve. But essentially, it's you got to put this stuff somewhere. So put it in drains, which can eventually be washed out with rainwater. There are aqueducts, and aqueducts are going to be bringing in water to the city, and that water then in turn can be used in different industries, but can also be used to flush out the streets, provide public fountains, and of course, water then ultimately is going into the baths. You can't have the big imperial bath complexes like the baths of Caracalla without the extra input of water being brought in by the aqueducts. The same thing with the public latrines. They don't really work unless the water is continually flowing and flushing away the human excrement. So Cloaca Maxima, this great sewer line that we see here visible in the flood walls just below the round temple of the Forum Boarium. It's not really a sewer in the proper sense of the word that we think of sewers. It really is a big storm drain. And it passes from the Subura area beyond the Forum, passes underneath the Forum, and then finally dumps out into the Tiber River. And in fact, all these cloaca sewer lines, including the one in the Circus Maximus, it's going to be a gravity flow system, and they're going to be dumping into the Tiber River. And essentially then it's also built to weather the constant flooding. As the water from the Tiber, as it rose, it would go back up the other direction. So you've got a system that you want to evacuate and get rid of materials, including heavy rainwaters. And at the same time, it's got to be structured and stable enough underneath your city streets that it's going to be able to withstand the powers and the forces of the flooding that would take place. So it's a system that works both ways, and of course, even in the Forum and the campus marshes will be flooded, and those sewer lines will be flooded. Then you have to maintain them and make sure they're clear of the eventual debris. The secondary function, really, or a byproduct of the sewer lines is, let's say, proper sanitation. But it doesn't seem to have been then the first goal on the um, on the minds of the Romans, really, if at all. Okay, aqueducts. Aqueducts bring in potable water. Then water is easily attainable and conveniently on hand in every quarter of Rome. And they're introduced to basically accommodate a growing population that's coming into Rome already from 312 BC of the Aqua Appia, and pretty much it's replacing less certain situations, water sources. So you have some springs, you have cisterns to collect rainwater, and then of course you have the Tiber River itself, which is where you're dumping in stuff to flush it away. So obviously the aqueducts are going to be bringing in a better opportunity for people living, growing, raising their families, and so forth. It's a huge opportunity for people, and it's also the only way you're going to be able to accommodate the growing number of people that are showing up in Rome because of all the opportunities that Rome then offers due to its success in conquest and legislation and managing other people throughout Italy and then with the empire. And of course, it's used also, the aqueduct water is used to enhance various businesses, famously the fullers that are cleaning your clothes, and also the bathing establishments. And we have a view here of the famous gate, the Aqua, or the Porta Maggiore, and this gate is built by Claudius in the mid 50s. And piggybacking on top are two lines, the Anno Nuova and the Claudia. So it's a magnificent declaration and celebration. As the Romans, Pliny the Elder famously celebrates the Cloaca Maxima, we too also get to see Claudius celebrating his achievement by bringing in some very important water sources into the city of Rome. Okay, then we have the Balneum and the Thermae, and it's all about the changing of the water that makes this actually a workable system. So you've got ultimately hundreds and hundreds, over 800 balnea, the smaller private baths, and then the big 11 Thermae from Agrippa to Constantine, and they work because water is being brought in, and we're pivoting here, looking at the back wall of the establishment, butting up against the minor Aventine Hill, and we're looking right now, where the trees are growing out of it, it's the remains of some of the cistern systems. So the reason why these baths are nice and pleasant and so forth isn't because you have scummy water filled with the filth of dirty people soaking in it, but rather because the water is going to be changed out frequently, right? There's no chlorine, and there's no real standard that says you have to be of, what physical condition and level of cleanliness to go in the baths. You go in the baths to get clean, and the only way that system then would work on a level of just the level of cleanliness and the level of good health situation provided to people is that that water is in fact changed out, the water that's being constantly filled into the nearby adjacent cisterns. Now, I'm going to pivot a little bit into another important feature of baths and just public spaces is the Forica, which are the um, public latrines that were everywhere in Roman cities. And here's one in Aquinum where we had the opportunity to visit, and I'll be sharing more of this with a later video. And it's a fantastic site, basically located halfway between Rome and Naples. It's a wonderful, wonderful site. And here we can pivot and look at most of the seating that we see here is original with, of course, a decorative black and white mosaic as well. And you see here that there is no real separation between, there are no stalls. So everyone is coming and using these facilities together. This particular bathing establishment off to the right has two components, men and women bathing. And so each area has its own latrine for those people. We assume then that they're separated then by the sexes, but in other cases, is not necessarily the case. And we think that even both sexes would be using the public latrines together. It's a different sense of privacy and private space, but it does definitely seem to be something that's frequented by a lot of people. And of course, in the big city of Rome, then you have a lot of people, and this is a step up from just using a chamber pot and dumping in the street, or urinating in an alleyway, or a street corner. So this is a pretty sophisticated solution that the Romans come up with. Now, just how sanitary it is, we'll see. So no toilet paper in the Forica. And the great examples that we can look at, we'll look at a bunch now. Rome, Pompeii, Herculaneum, Ostia. In Rome in particular, there's Largo Argentina, which I think we've looked at before, but on either side of the Curia Pompeiana, you have this incredible two large public latrines that replace, then subvert that space, which is known for the assassination of Julius Caesar. You make it into a public space that you can't exactly go to and celebrate because it is a public restroom facility. On the upper decks of the Forum of Caesar, rebuilt by Trajan, you have a large latrine. In the Crypta Balbi, in the apse of the portico, you have a latrine. So there's some great examples in the city of Rome. We don't just have to travel to Pompeii and Ostia. Now you have a tersorium, this device that we see here. It's basically a sponge on a stick, but we know that they use other things: cloth scraps, leaves, potsherds, okay, that are smoothed over. Because obviously, wiping your bottom is a pretty delicate area, and you're not talking about a broken fragment of a potsherd. You're gonna cut yourself or something like that. Um, so you use what you have, because certainly paper that we're used to, toilet paper, would have been too expensive of a commodity. If you think about papyrus being made by hand, so you're doing what you can. In the cases of the potsherds, fig leaves, and cloth scraps, are things you can use and throw away. The sponge on a stick concept, which we don't have mentioned too many times in antiquity, although it is mentioned, so we don't know exactly how common it was, but it's something that you would dip in, rinse, and then use again. Are you taking it with you? Are they, available to the public to use? I mean, how does it exactly work? We don't know. But the bottom line is, more than vinegar, you're not going to have much to clean off this sponge. So ultimately, we start to get into this idea of what's being spread. How are people, we know today when we read in the papers about E. coli or rotavirus or something like that being spread, we think about fecal matter, we think about um, agriculture, and same thing with worms, parasites that we know the Romans had. Through the study of fecal matter that's been excavated and analyzed throughout the Roman world, so we know what's really common. And one of the things is that this human waste, where's it all going? A lot of it ends up in the fields, in agricultural situations. So without proper composting, that we know, human matter has to be composted for about a year for you to be sure that these parasites and eggs and so forth die. But if not, then this cycle going on here, or even the people not properly washing their hands and then touching other materials like the sponges and stuff, are going to lead to contaminating one another with whatever's in their feces, which would be these parasites. So it doesn't sound then to be so sophisticated or clean as we would like to imagine, to keep that in mind. But at the same token, we'll see these are substantial structures, these Forica, these bathrooms, as part of bathing establishments, as were the cisterns that would be provide lots of water into the bathing establishments on a frequency. That they're thinking permanently, they're thinking grand structures, and they're thinking of a long-term solutions by big architecture that they put in place something for everyone to use, for everyone to benefit from, given their limitations of understanding how these kinds of diseases and parasites are being spread. Here we're going to take a quick look underneath the large triclinium on the Palatine Hill down to the Domus Transitoria of Nero. And we have a large latrine underneath this facility, which now you can visit. If you do visit, make that special ticket, get that special ticket to admire some of these underground spaces. Examining the latrines of the Domus Transitoria. 50-seater, that's what we shy about. So here we have this little glimpse of some of the seating is preserved, some of it not, but you can see the trenches beneath where the water would flow. And that's doing a great job. It's taking away the smell. It's taking away the excrement and the urine. So that's great. Maybe ultimately we look at this and say, was it such a sanitary environment? If then afterwards you're reusing somebody's sponge or whatnot. But the reality is they're building big permanent structures throughout their city to accommodate a lot of people. I mean, if you think about Rome being a city of 1 million people or 800,000 people, that's a lot of people that are defecating and urinating all the time. And it's not even talking about the babies in their diapers. So therefore, you need to get rid of all that material. I mean, if people are just dumping in the street corners and stuff like that, or in the streets, I mean, you'd really have a disaster. So they're doing what they can to accommodate just a huge influx of people. And in that, I think so. There's been a lot of criticism recently about how dirty and filthy Rome has been, and so on, and smelly, and everyone has head lice, and everyone has bed bugs, and everyone has parasites. Yeah, okay, fine, but they still pulled it off, right? You didn't have people dying of outbreaks every day. We have a very successful city that can accommodate 1 million people. That's something to applaud and recognize. And they did what they could with their means, with the aqueducts, and they did it with their big public latrines to accommodate all those people and to keep a sense of, decency and a certain level of sanitation so that people could indeed enjoy their city and the benefits of that great city. We're in the apse of the cryptobalby. You can check out our video on the cryptobalby on ancientromelive.org and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/WeDigRome. So we're pivoting into this beautiful apse, and the back wall has been retrofitted into being a very large curved latrine. So we can't exactly identify all of the latrines. I think there are about 144 in one regionary catalog is being documented and existing in Rome, the big public latrines. But we have a handful, and they're pretty impressive. And we can imagine just how many more there would have been throughout the city to accommodate all those people buying, selling, trading, living their lives, going off to the baths, going to the forum. You needed to accommodate their needs. And in fact, we walk around the city of Rome today and say there aren't enough public bathrooms. You got to jump into a bar, you got to jump into a restaurant, you got to jump into your house. But looks like ancient Rome was actually solving that need and giving it to the people to give them a decent place, a clean place. Oftentimes, like this one, lined with marble, beautiful space into which they can relieve themselves. But the cities were definitely dirty, and people continue to dump material into the streets. Here we are at Albafucens. Don't have to go to just Pompeii to see these sidewalks that would keep the pedestrian out of the street, which would have surely been filled with mud, debris, and garbage. And I have my younger daughter here modeling. But this is what you did. You crossed the street in this way. Well, not in this way, but you crossed the street to keep yourself out of what would have been a rather unpleasant environment. Of course, the carts are passing by, and of course, the animals then are passing by and defecating. So, it would have been a pretty dirty situation. And of course, this kind of solution is going to again raise your living experience and your daily experience in making your way through the urban center of, well, whatever Roman city you lived in this case, Abruzzo and Abruzzo. Take you over here. So pretty standard in Roman cities. And beneath that road, there is also a storm drain. So, eventually things are going to be flushed out in a proper way, keeping away from your own experience and, giving you a better sense of your city and a better experience. Okay, then there are bathrooms at home. If they're at home, they're small, private, usually tied to a kitchen drain. Not really good for sanitation. But hey, you probably only have one big drain like that in your house. And even upstairs, a terracotta pipe situation would be a nice place to dump your chamber pot into, and then finally down into the city drain outside. But basically speaking, the private bathrooms, they weren't connected to the outside drains of the city, in part for theft or vermin like rats coming up into your bathroom, but also because human waste was a commodity. And people called the stercorari would come and knock on your door at night, and your doorman would let them in. And then they would haul out the excrement that you had underneath like basically your cesspit underneath your bathroom. And then that goes outside the city into the fields to be used for fertilizer. So another good reason not to tie your cesspit or your home bathroom into the city drains is also that's literally worth money. And to give you an idea of how busy those people were, they're one of the few people allowed to use a cart, have an ox cart or whatnot, active in the city during the day. Rome was so crowded, all wagons were forbidden to come into the city. They had to bring in all the goods, the wood, the marble, the whatnot at night. Here's one of a few exceptions. So they're obviously doing a very big business. And finally, then, cleanliness in Rome. So we want to think about the baths as not something that was just a place of sanitation. It was a place to wash off the filth. It was a place of social expression. It was a place of commercial activity. It's a perk. It's something extra that you then came to uh, take for granted when you're in a Roman city. And cleanliness was part of the bathing ritual, as clean as you thought you could be. But they had no idea of how disease was spreading the way that we know of it today. And so, disease spread in swimming pools that were filled with bathers that were clean and dirty, sick and well, um, pools of water that weren't changed so frequently, could just would be filled with bacteria. These are the realities. And they did recognize some of it. Galen and Celsus are two famous physicians, and they do say, well, if you got an open wound, don't go into the baths. If you have a cough, probably don't want to go into the baths. So, anyways, other times they see it as a curative. Go here for the baths for this and that affliction. So they had some ideas that the heat, the sweat is good for you. Remember, back in the day, it was all about the different balance of the humors. These different liquids of bile and sweat and spit and blood that you had to have a certain kind of balance. So sometimes it was achieve that balance of the humors by going into the baths or sweating more or whatnot. So, we have a lot of opportunities to talk about the Romans when we talk about bathing. I just wanted to spend a couple minutes today looking at the ideas of cleanliness. Sure, they're not as clean as we would like them to have been. Sure, there are limitations in the bathing facilities and the bathrooms, and life was quite hard, and people got ill, and they pretty much lived with bed bugs and lice, and a lot of people around the world still today do. And of course, you can read about the bed bug affliction in New York City a couple years ago. You can read about the Emperor Augustus, who definitely had a patch on the skin that was roundworm. Um, High and mighty to the lowly, they're all living with these realities. But I think what we can take away from this is with the aqueducts, with the incredible bathing facilities, with the solidity, the physical spaces that are created for, say, the improvement of the human condition through the baths, through the public fountains, and through the public latrines. then you definitely have a good argument that the Romans did the best that they could to accommodate the people living in their incredible metropolis of almost 1 million people.
Thanks for joining From the Vault, one of our long deep dive lectures. Tune in every Wednesday from the Vault.